So here we have something I want to share, and it's pertaining to what we identify as targeting and targeted individual, or the gangstalking program. And it's been brought to my attention, recently, because there's sites that keep reminding you and sending you information, pertaining to gang stalking and what you call a targeted individual. And I see a lot of inconsistencies in certain things that may be created to cause a certain kind of paranoia amongst certain people. And we might need to address that, because a lot of things that I discuss or I try to share with people in particular is, a lot of it may come off as religious text, but it has a certain purpose behind it. And if a lot of people don't get it, eventually they will. But this is something that it was shared, and I had this in my phone for a long time, and I wanted to bring it to light. So I wanted to touch on it, because we can get a little bit deeper into it it as we discuss it. We can get a little bit more detail about what it's pertaining to. So you have it here, and that's what it's going to be. So it poses the question: what does it mean to be a targeted individual? And it tells you the government makes the person look and sound crazy, but that is a cover up. Why does the government do this? So here we're seeing that the person that is sharing this is pinpointing the government as the overall initiator of targeting people, which the government can be a factor in it, but it is reliant on the people, the participation of the people. The people are key players in it, so it goes beyond the scope of government. We talked about certain secret societies and other role players in it. You might have the Central Intelligence Agencies and FBI and things like that, but they all comprise of people. They don't exist on their own. These aren't just businesses that operate independently. They act on the participation of people. So these are employed. They employ people, and the people are the initiators. So we have to be specific about saying or calling the cat a cat. Even though I call my cat dog, that's because that's short for dogless, which would make him something other than a dog. He's not a dog, he's a cat. But that's just, me. But the government makes the person look and sound crazy, but that is a cover up. Why does the government do this? It simply means you are not a clone. The targeted individual has a soul and certain DNA that is not woven into the system, which makes you an outsider. In reality, you are not placed in a program although the systematic understanding is that it's a program. So what they're saying is that systematically you would think that it's a program, but in all actuality it's a society. It's a society of people that is actually doing it. Society that's comprised of people that is doing it, and it's systematic amongst people. And you have to take a look at history in order for you to understand how that carries how that is carried out. When we have biblical records, and being that these are old or ancient writings, this gives you a historical standpoint of how people were or are. And your history describes a lot of your makeup today, especially when it comes to when you look at the medical field. When you see the doctor wants to know about your history, if there's any history of this in your family, so they can identify what the problem is. So you have to understand the history of things. If you go into the Bible is, it can be a storybook about humanity, about, the interactions amongst people in those times, which would describe interactions amongst people today. So we have a history, and that's one thing that we have to touch on, is the history of people, and why it's important for us to do that. But he stated that, or she stated that, the targeted individual has a soul and certain DNA that is not woven within the system, which makes you an outsider. So you are not an insider, you are actually an outsider. And this is what we're going to talk about when we're dealing with alienation, to alienate, to make an alien out of someone. See, aliens in a sense of, outer space or space exploration, and, coming to this earth, and spaceships crashing and stuff like that is the idea we have when we're talking about aliens. But we don't identify with the aliens amongst us. And anyone that's targeted would be considered an alien, because they would be considered an outsider, an outsider. And while the vast majority of the people, doesn't matter if you're in a congregation, if you're in a gang, if you're in a secret society, if you are in society, the thing is that you are an insider. And one thing you fear is being outcasted or being an outsider, which is, to make you a foreigner, to make you strange. Come on, dog. Come on. Come on. Come on. Come on, dog. Dog, you're not an alien. Come on. You're not an alien, you're an insider. He's an insider with me. That's yeah. But one thing that people do fear is being outsiders, but they want to be that. They want to be an outsider but still be an insider. And this goes into being in the world but not of the world. So we could talk about that. This is why, a lot of things is expounded on when it comes to me. I talk about a lot of things that, might sound, a little bit off to some, but it has, like I said, it has a meaning behind it. And they tell you that because your DNA is resistant in some way to be placed under mind control, you will be constantly attacked to see how you are able to maneuver in mind control situations in ways that others, the masses, cannot. Why can't you be broken? That's the question. Or how can you be broken? How can you get out of negative situations? How well can you do under pressure? These are questions that the shadow wants to know. At the point of data collection, they disseminate certain aspects of your character to the mind controlled, unaware, and semi aware agents to make them more human or better individuals. So that's one thing that you see. You will see that a lot of what you experience gets documented, and it gets authored by other people, and other people assume, people that can be controlled, they assume these particular characteristics that you exhibit to many, to like to the onlooker. They exhibit that. They will hold on. They are like, that's what I see on a lot of accounts, like people, emulating, certain things that you do, or that you experience, and it's no secret that it comes from, study and observation, especially when, my early accounts of being watched and monitored comes from dreams and visions that you have. Like I spoke about, one of the visions I had was I was in a prison and no one was speaking to me, and I asked them, why was I in here? Why am I in here? And nobody said anything to me. And then an officer came and told me that, somebody wanted you in here. They wanted you in a prison, in like a certain confinement, that you couldn't get out of. And, that was the mercy of what you would call God giving you a little bit of understanding beforehand, so you know how to maneuver in that situation. That was what you would call, having a divine revelation, because eventually you would feel, isolated or alienated, especially in the social media, in these arenas where, there's a social setting, and your interaction and your engagement with others are, sometimes nil or either non-existent. People act like they don't see you. That could either be because, there's a machine that's keeping your content from being seen, or there's slander, there's a smearing of your name, there's certain information that's been distributed to others that may have affected their view of you, but there's a way for you to be isolated and alienated from people. And I've experienced that, and it really had no spiritual effect on me, but you do understand it, and you do see that it's being done. And a lot of people, they may, because they haven't experienced it, they may deem you kind of paranoid, or they may not even believe you, in a sense, because they haven't experienced it. So these are some of the things that if you can't relate, then you will not take it seriously or even acknowledge it, because you simply can't relate to it, you know. But that's one thing that I see, and I see that they disseminate a lot of the things that you endure or that you experience or that you know or that you may have knowledge of, and give it to others. This is something that's done, to make them either appear more human or either better individuals. You know, the smearing of you is to keep you, or try to keep you, in a place of subordinates, meaning you will have no influence on the masses, again, because you can't be controlled in some way. Any other fake excuse as to targeting is to be ignored. This is where this cuts off at. It's like, don't even ignore any other, reason why you would be, examined or observed. See, there's targeting, then there's observing, observing a person, and putting a person under certain observation, because they're simply, a different being. They're different in the sense that they are uncommon. There's a saying that real is rare and fake is everywhere. So when it's rare, and it would be considered something that is real and genuine, so we have to examine this to see what's inside of it. What is it? What does it consist of? So if there was a new species that was discovered and it was rare, they would run all sorts of tests to see what it is all comprised of. And this is just something that is expected of humanity, because we are inquisitive people, and one of the things that we do is study. We study things that we don't know in order to know them better. So that's just something that I wanted to share. But we want to talk about alienating, alienate, to alienate, or alienation is what you would actually call it, alienation. Because there's four things that people do throughout, the course of history. We accept or we reject, we praise or we crucify. These are things that has been recorded in the history of humanity. We one of the reasons why we accept is because we want to feel accepted ourselves. So in order for you to be able to accept others, you have to be accepted. In order for you to reject, you have to reject in order for you to not be rejected. In order for you not to be amongst the rejected, and you have to give praise in order to feel praiseworthy. And you also have to crucify, so you yourself don't be amongst the crucified. So this is the reason why, as humanity, we tend to, do certain things on a social level. We would crucify collectively. We would crucify people, whether that's put them on a public display of ridicule and humiliation and mockery. We have to do that so we are not put on a public display of humiliation, ridicule, and mockery. This is just the way it goes. If it's not them, it could be me that's on display. And a lot of people don't want to be put in that position, and if I'm not the one that's given praise, then I may not be worthy of praise myself. So let me give praise so that I feel as though I am worthy of praise myself. So, yeah, this is a society type thing. We're going to society. We would see that, society, it has a definition. It's the aggregate of people living together in a more or less ordered community. It's an ordered community that you live together in. A society is a group of individuals involved in persistent social interactions, or a large social group sharing the same spatial or social territory, typically subjected to the same political authority. This is a society. An organization or club formed for a particular purpose or activity. The situation of being in the company of other people. A specific section of a community. The community of people living in a particular country or region and having shared customs, laws, and organizations. So when you're talking about a society, this is, what you get: a society of people that lives together and have a shared commonality that makes them, a community. It's a society is defined as a group of individuals, not an individual, but a group of these individuals together, involved in persistent social interactions, typically sharing the same spatial or social territory, subject to the same political authority and cultural expectations. It can also refer to a large group of people living together in an organized way, making decisions about how to do things collectively. Additionally, society encompasses the concept of companionship or association with one's fellows, highlighting the importance of social relationships. So this is just a definition of what social group and societies consist of. It encompasses the concept of companionship, in association with one fellows, highlighting the importance of social relationships. So that's, society. Society is, what we live in. We live in a society where we have a certain expectation that is common, amongst each other. And our expectation is to, like I said, 4 things: to accept, to reject, or to give praise, to crucify. That is just amongst some of the things that we do, in a social group. We accept things or we rebuke things, by saying that that behavior is not tolerated. We don't tolerate a certain behavior, and then there's certain behaviors that we do tolerate. There's certain things that we give acclaim and praise to, and there's certain things that we just have no tolerance for. And those things would get anyone that is in agreement with it, what you would call crucified. They would publicly, or they would do it in private, even privately or publicly, they would disagree with it. But it's something that is shared collectively, the agreements or disagreements with certain things, So, back to, alienation. Alienation, which refers to the feelings of being disconnected or estranged from oneself, others, or society. You would be disconnected from society, even your own self and others, you know. And it can manifest as a sense of isolation where individuals feel they have no connection with the people around them or are not part of a community. In sociology, alienation describes a state where individuals feel disconnected from their nature or society, often leading to feelings of powerlessness. Additionally, alienation can have significant implications for mental health, contributing to issues like depression and anxiety. In a broader context, it can also refer to the estrangement from one's environment or work. So those are some of the effects of alienation. Depression, anxiety, um, feelings of powerlessness. Like you would feel you have no powerlessness. You would have no power in certain situations. You would also feel, a sense of isolation, and you wouldn't be able to connect with people around you. And or that you're not part of a certain community. So these are certain things that happens when a person is alienated. You are even feel less of yourself. Or have your own nature. And that's one thing that being stalked would actually have you feel like you're isolated and alienated, because in order for you to be stalked, you have to be isolated. Isolation is a huge part of a person being stalked. You can't, if you're in a group setting, you would feel less of the effect of a person stalking you than you would as an individual. Like there's people that's actually profiting from the existence of there being what you call targeted individuals. I saw a person create t-shirts, and he was sharing it as a means of spreading awareness about it. But you are more observant, because this particular person, he proclaimed himself to be a Christian and said that he's being gang stalked because he accepts Jesus Christ as his personal Lord and Savior or something like that. He said, but he's saying that he's being gang stalked because of his affiliation with Jesus Christ, and that has to be far from the truth, because there's, like I told you, Christianity is the hugest, amongst the biggest religions in the world. And by you being in a congregation and amongst a congregation of people that share the same that have a common interest, which would be Jesus Christ, as a Christian, that is the focal point of your religion. So not only are you gang stalked because of that, then every Christian in the world has to be gang stalked because of that as well. So we have to be mindful of the people that profit off of certain ideas that exist at the expense of those that are actually enduring that. When I tell you about the story of what Christ was in the Bible, that was gang stalking in its purest form. That was gang stalking. And for you to not identify with it, then you don't understand what is being, what is being conveyed in the teachings, in the message, in how not only was he gang stalked, but what he was teaching was eventually disseminated, and put into religious texts and given to people in a religious form. So you do have that being something that is known, that people after your demise cast lots on the things that you own, and the teaching is something that you own as well. If you taught something, if something was taught, then this can be re-authored and given to others. you know so that's something that you wanted to talk about, because you do have that in Luke 20:20, where you had Christ being spies being sent to Christ. Spies, meaning that you had people that was sent that was supposed to be, appear as righteous or as sincere people, but they were sent to, collect information and to gather information as so to trap you up into saying certain things, but that is what gang stalkers do. If you aren't being followed and watched and observed to see what you're doing, to see what you're saying, to have your phones and everything tapped, to have cameras installed in your living quarters, and just to see what all you're doing. That is tactics that are used in gang stalking. So a lot of people want to know more about why they are gang stalked, and some of them are at a breaking point, and this is where we get back to the thing that I shared. You don't break. How well do you hold yourself up under pressure? How well can you maintain under pressure? When we're talking about, ooh, I'm about to get them, I want to, ooh, you don't have the capacity to endure. So why are we observing you when you're just as common as everybody else? See, we talk about, they say that, it simply means you are not a clone. That means that if you're not a clone, you're not a form of that person and that person and that person and that person and that person, which, even though they look different, they're the same as this person and that person and this person and those people and those people. Because one thing that God showed me or told me was that if they are not you, they are them. Meaning that if they are not one of you, they are one of them. So if they are not one of you and they're proclaiming to be one of you, they are still one of them. Because what makes you you is you are you. You are you because you don't want to be one of them. That is how you be one of you. You are you because you are you. You're not one of them. You've experienced being one of them, and you were still you. That's how you was able to still be you, because you're not one of them. I'm not sure if y'all even following that. But if they are not you, they are one of them. So if they are one of them, then they can be amongst the stalkers, those that gang stalk you. If they are not one of you, if they are not someone who is exactly like you. So when you are someone like you, you know how you respond to certain situations. You know that you can't be broken. You know that there's nothing that can actually break you. You feel, but as far as your healing process, it's on autopilot, and it has its own. You don't need anything to initiate that process. It does it on its own accord. So if you can't be broken, you have a self-repairing nature to yourself. Some people have a self-destructing nature, but you have a self-repairing nature. Your self-destructive nature may be, the lack of certain things, and not being able to fit in. That would make a person self-destruct. If you don't fit into a group, or if people outcast you, if they reject you, that will cause a certain people to self-destruct. Where you, on the other hand, that would self-repair you. That would make you say, I don't need to fit in with them, because I was already told that I'm different from them. Maybe they need to try to fit in with me, because you know you have a better outlook than they do about certain things, especially in life, that can be beneficial to them. And again, this goes back to, things being disseminated and given to others to make them to make them appear more human or better individuals. And again, you have a particular society with the purpose to make good better, or to make men better. In order for you to do that, you have to base that on a certain teaching that would improve a person's, psyche, or their psychological makeup, and what they deem morally sound and immorally sound, or immoral, period. So we have to, examine certain things that can be beneficial to others, and we might get that from examining people that have these particular qualities. Because, like I said, I've seen people that don't fit the bill of being builders, but being destroyers, being initiated into, something about building and bettering, and they haven't themselves been builders but destroyers. They haven't, anybody can talk a good one, but being a good one is kind of different. The actions are something that speak louder than words. Words are, just the surface, but what's underneath the surface is what actually counts. But we go back here, and we see that, clones means that everybody's, just another version of another version of another version of another version of another version, and then you have the original of the source of where things come from. So society is something that, cloning is a real thing, and it's cloning behaviors. Like I told you before, one of the signs, or if you want to see the people that's gang stalking you, they all are sharing the same signs. They all have something that they want in common, and one of the things they all want in common is success. They all want power. People want power, and because they lack power. I've made a statement before that, one that doesn't want power is already powerful. Does one continue, that has a full belly, continue to consume food? So if you are already full of power, you don't seek to find or obtain more power. And these people that continue to seek power are powerless, because they want more power. They don't have enough power. So what that makes them powerless. There goes my cat. name is dog. Less. Dogless, because he's not a dog and he will never be a dog. So he's dogless, so why does people continue to want power that already have power? That means that they are powerless because they don't have the adequate amount of power needed to say that I am powerful. You get it? No, y'all don't get that? That's how it goes. That's how it goes. So I don't seek power, because now they have a particular person, that, attention is power, in a world where, it's ran by, socially accepting. Attention is power. So one person had expressed his reasons for doing certain things that may have been immoral or, not righteous, and he stated that he wanted power. I want power. He wanted power, So, and to this day, he's amongst those that, get shared amongst, society in a certain group, and you see it, firsthand. You see these things and how they're carried out, which makes you, not a clone, because others might not see it, but because they want to be acceptive, they have to accept other things. You're not acceptive of that. You're not one that accepts, celebrities because they are discussed, or that they are in the public view, or the public says, yeah, this is the top artist. So you're not one that just accepts anything because it's what you will call socially acceptable or socially accepted. You're one that always questions and always tries to find reason and logic in certain things. So that's what we do. Like I said, it's all about isolating and alienating a particular people or a person, and that is a huge part in the program. And like I said it earlier, it stated, it's not a program, it's a systematic way that people have a history of being, and that's just something that you feel obligated to express to people, because we do see people commenting and saying that they relate to certain things, but do they relate to certain things? Like for me, I don't really need any power or any followers that make me feel as though I have power, because I'm already powerful. How are you powerful? Because I have self-control. You're in control of your mind. Your mental capacity is what you allow your mental capacity to be. And if I wanted to be, limited, then I would limit my study. I would limit my research. But if I wanted to be limitless, then I would continue to study and research and formulate ideas and formulate thought. If we talk about, thought crime, thought crime, and there's a person called thought policing, on YouTube, and I believe that that particular person stated that I was an agent. I could have been an agent, or that I sounded like an agent from the information that I was given, but maybe the agents sound more like me from the information that they're actually gathering from you. And I don't know, but I'm not associated with anything. Somebody also stated that, I was a Moor and that I do black magic. Or, no, I don't do black magic. I practice black magic. And how do I this person practice black magic? And that's crazy that somebody would say that. Dog. Dog, what do you want, bruh? I understand. Dog wants to play, and it's not time to play right now, bruh. We can't play right now, bruh. There's no string right here, bruh. He's feeling alienated and left out. It's the reason why he comes up here and stuff like that. But he's not an outsider. You everything that I do revolves around, serving you. But, we have what you call thought crimes, and it refers to an idea or opinion that is illegal or considered socially unacceptable according to the people in authority. And the people in authority are actually the people, because they have the authority to accept certain things and reject certain things, or the act of having such thoughts. In contemporary English usage, it describes personal beliefs that are contrary to accepted norms of society. So if you have a certain idea that is contrary to the accepted norms of society, your ideas will be rejected, even though it may be the right and the most appropriate ideas. But if it's contrary to the accepted norms in society will actually reject you. And that brings me back to an episode of Seinfeld where Seinfeld was alienated. He was cut off from his building. Kramer had put up pictures in the building so that everybody in the building could be more social with each other and know each other and be more interactive with each other. And in the beginning of the episode, Seinfeld was against the kiss hello with like a female seeing him and kissing him on the cheek, and he didn't like that. He was like, I don't want to kiss hello. So after Kramer went and put up the pictures in the building, all the people in the building started to be more social with each other, and the women in the building started kissing Seinfeld. Hello, hey, Seinfeld, kissed him on the cheek, and he was just against that. And now he got out of the kiss hello with the old person that was on a kiss hello meet and greet or greeting, and then now he's in a building where every time the women saw him, they would kiss him on the cheek. So he rejected their kiss, their kiss hello, and that got back to the rest of the building, and the building actually they ostracized him and made him feel alienated in his own building. They was rude to him. They was walking by, not speaking to him, and they created social groups, and they made him feel, left out. One time they was saying they kissed the person who he rejected a kiss from kissed two other people, and they wanted to go to the coffee shop. And when they was about to go out, one of the guys looked at Jerry and smiled and laughed and said, "That sounds like a good idea." The show is the divine show. Like I said, it's people being people. Not only that, but you know who makes that show. You see it in the the wording of Seinfeld. You see. Let me show you real quick if I could. It's right here. Look, Seinfeld logo. At first, it's kind of like just bland, but then you would actually see it come to life, like in the middle of the show, like in the middle of it. You know, you would see it come to life. If you understand, you know, if you understand anything about anything else, but you would see it. But you know, right now they're not even allowing you to get it, but you get it. You know, you get it. You know, you. If you see, if you have eyes to see, then you know what I mean. Uh, Seinfeld is, like I said, is not just a show about nothing. It's a show about something, because that's what they really wanted to, convey to people. That it's just a show about nothing, but it's actually about something, and it's people. You know, these are people being people. You know, but we have what you call social alienation, and we can get this out of the Wikipedia, and it gives you a little bit more um, detail, about what it is, the effects of it, the history, and where it all stemmed from. It was talked about in Karl Marx theory of alienation. This is from the Russian, he's a Russian, German, Karl Marx. I forget what Karl Marx is, but you know, um, but he's the communist, and he saw how capitalism put people at odds with each other, and would be the grounds for you know competitive and clashing amongst people, to get ahead and to establish themselves in a society, which would lead to being successful in society. So this is what you would get into when talking about Marxism. There's people that's anti-Marxism because it's communism, and we look at it from a political standpoint. Like, these are political parties: capitalism, communism, socialism, and stuff like that. But Karl Marx was one that talked about how alienation affected people. But social alienation is a person's feeling of disconnection from a group, whether friends, family, or wider society, with which the individual has an affiliation. Such alienation has been described as a condition in social relationships reflected by 1. A low degree of integration or common values, and 2. A high degree of distance or isolation between individuals, or 3B, 3S3A, then 3B, between an individual and a group of people in a community or work environment. Enumeration added. It is a sociological concept developed by several classical and contemporary theorists. The concept has many discipline-specific uses and can refer both to a personal psychological state subjectively and to a type of social relationship objectively. So with me, I feel, I not only feel it, but you experienced it, because you have a certain group. When you have family, You have the family dynamic, whether it's friends, family, or wider society, which society today would be, social media would be included in that. So you have friends and families, friends that you normally interacted with, they become quiet on you. Then you have family that you live amongst that would, distance themselves from you. Then you also have the social media outlets where there's very little interaction with you on these social platforms. So that would be a form of social alienation, with your friends, family, and now with social media, and community wise as well, with those that surround you. But when you do go places and there's people that don't know you, and because of the aura that you have and the spirit that you have, they will interact with you because they may be unaware of the the mob like mentality of isolating and alienating the person. But that's that. That is when it comes to social alienation. Um, we don't we That would probably take a little bit of time to get into, but powerlessness and alienation in the sense of a lack of power has been technically defined by Seaman as the expectancy or probability held by the individual that his own behavior cannot determine the occurrence of the outcomes or reinforcements he seeks. Seaman argues that this is the notion of alienation as it originated in the Marxian view of the worker's condition in capitalist society. The worker is alienated to the extent that the prerogative and means of decisions are expropriated by the ruling entrepreneurs, meaning that what you do is determined by those that are in control of certain things. Like if you are on maybe Facebook, your posts being seen and heard and being the response that it should get is dependent upon those that are actually in control of that particular platform. Same thing with YouTube. The response that you should get is at the mercy of those that are in control of the moderation, the moderators of it, and the owners of it, or those that are surrounding, the observation of you. When she is conscious of, hold on, more succinctly, Caitlin Fishman says a person suffers from alienation in the form of powerlessness when she is conscious of the gap between what she would like to do and what she feels capable of doing. So if you would like to, engage in a lot of activities sociably, but you aren't capable of engaging in those activities, because you are limited, then you will feel a certain powerlessness because of that. In discussions of powerlessness, Seaman also incorporated the insights of psychologist Julian Rotter. Rotter distinguishes between internal control and external locus of control, which means difference amongst persons or situations and the degree to which success or failure is attributable to external factors, like luck, chance, or powerful others. So these are things that have an external control. Internal control is your ability to bring forth what it is that you're trying to bring out. But the external control is, maybe it's the luck or just the chance that I did it, or either powerful others. Did I do it at the right time? That would be luck, or that would be chance. Oh, you got lucky with that one. You made a hit record. Boy, you got lucky with that one. Or is it powerful others that is putting what you do on display for others, for them to, flock to it, and having what they call a machine behind you, as against success or failures that is seen as the outcome of one's personal skill or characteristics. That is something that would be attributable to what's called external control. Powerlessness, therefore, is the perception that the individual does not have the means to achieve his goals. And, that is something that, particular people have experienced, especially in America. And, that was all what you would call mind games, and, to keep a people in a certain box. When you had civil rights movement and segregation and stuff like that. That was, external things, external control that became an internal control mechanism. The external things controlled the internal response of a people, and it created the people you have today. Because of the external locus of control, and that is a part of the history of a people, and how people, interacted and responded to other people. Ultimately breaking with the Marxist tradition, Gaia remarks that a new type of powerlessness has emerged, where the core problem is no longer being unfree, but rather being unable to select from among an overchoice of alternatives for actions, where the consequences one often cannot even fathom. Gaia adopts cybernetics to alienation theory and writes, what is cybernetics? Cybernetics is the transdisciplinary study of circular, causal processes such as feedback and recursion, where the effects of a system's actions return as inputs to that system, influencing subsequent action. It is concerned with general principles that are relevant across multiple contexts, including in economic, biological, cognitive, social system, and also practical activities such as design and learning and managing. Cybernetics transdisciplinary character has meant that it intersects with a number of other fields, leading to it having both wide influence and diverse interpretations. The field is named after an example of circular causal feedback, that of stirring a ship. The ancient Greek refers to the person who steers a ship. In steering a ship, the position of the rudder is adjusted in continual response to the effect it is observed of having, forming a feedback loop through which a steady course can be maintained in a changing environment, responding to disturbances from across winds and tides. Yeah, I see that. I see what they actually, mean by that. The later the more complex one's environment, the later one is confronted with the latent and often unintended consequences of one's actions. Consequently, in view of this causality obscuring time lag, both the rewards and punishments for one's actions increasingly tend to be viewed as random, often with apathy and alienation as a result. So, you know, so we do have that to consider. You know, you can always come here and check it out. You know, with social alienation and you know, the effects of it. Then we also have what you call alienation versus isolation. You know, alienation, it also gives you some detail here. You know, as you can see from the background, this is where you actually get the alienation from, to be put inside of um, a brick wall inside of your head. This is where you have living in your head. Sometimes you could live in your head comfortably, or you could be, you know, barricaded and bricked inside of there, and there's no way for you to escape. You know, because something put you inside of there. You know, this is a form of alienation. Someone putting you inside of something, outside of something, you know, putting you inside of a prison, inside of a world, you know, of freedom. You're being alienated by being, you know, outcasted from being an inside, you know, and being inside of something that you are held outside of, you know. But you know, we get the definition of that. You know, one thing that was stated here was that they said that women are more prone to isolating. You know, mothers, you know, it's worth mentioning that research has found that mothers are more likely, you know, than fathers to be involved in situations where they intentionally keep children away from the other parent. Experiencing alienation can make a person feel hopeless, have low self-esteem, and lack of motivation. It also makes it harder for them to form healthy relationships and find support, which can make them feel even more alone and distressed. So, you know, some of us experience that in, you know, situations where there's custody disputes, and, you know, which that would be in the form of, if a parent is kept away from another parent, that should be a form of what you would call child abuse, because a child needs both parents to be present in their life to get the adequate love, attention, and support that they need to be successful, you know, and productive people, you know, in this world. Because if not, then they would suffer certain kind of, you know, traumas throughout their life. That's just what it is. This is why we have so many problems, because, you know, there's, you know, broken homes, and you know, families that was torn apart, and you know, but feeling distant from work. Hold on. Some common signs, aspects of alienation and symptoms load amongst, I guess this is what you would call the book that it's in, the European Journal of Public Health. Feeling distant from work, family, and friends, feeling helpless, experiencing pervasive feelings that the world lacks purpose, feeling left out or disconnected from conversations, events, or social circles, struggling to approach and communicate with others, particularly authoritative figures, experiencing a heightened sense of unease, discomfort, or fear when interacting with others, displaying a tendency to reject or disobey rules or and societal norms. So this is where we have the alienation versus isolation, where it's cool to isolate yourself, to be set apart and to isolate, yourself from certain things. Then you have the alienation where it's imposed on you by others. It's a feeling that you get when others do it to you, and you will also begin to feel like an alien when you do that, like a foreigner or someone that is just not common. Aliens are not common. That's why they call them extraterrestrial. That's why you have extra sensory as opposed to common sensory, common sense. You have extra sensory, which is all a form of being something that's alien to people. So alienation is a feeling of being estranged or neglected. Isolation means living in separation or alone. Alienation involves isolation, but it is mostly involuntarily. Isolation can both be voluntary or involuntary. Alienation is mostly involuntary. So alienation can stem from factors such as societal norms, cultural differences, personal experiences, or a sense of not fitting in. That is where alienation can stem from. Societal norms. What is the norm of society? Certain values that society value, you may have no value for, which would make you have a certain sense of not fitting in. If I don't feel, that, I don't feel as though I fit in, so that can be a form of where alienation stems from. Isolation may result from factors like physical distance, illness, mental health issues, or a deliberate choice. You can feel isolation from a certain a mental health issue. If you are feeling paranoid, if you are depressed, or if you have a certain anxiety, these can contribute to you isolating yourself and wanting to be isolated. Then you also have you can lead to feelings of alienation can lead to feelings of depression, anxiety, and a loss of purpose or identity. This is the reason why certain people that may have what you call a calling or a certain purpose, and when you hear a lot of talk about destiny swapping, and people trying to take your purpose from you and stuff like that, this is what a people would do as far as bringing forth of that decision to do that, alienating you, to make you feel alienated. So you may have a certain purpose to do, or a certain identity to uphold, but being that you're alienated, you would feel a lack of wanting to fulfill that purpose or walk inside of that identity. So this is where you have walking in your purpose. Then you have others that can take your purpose from, well, they can try to, but they, like I said, they're one of the objectives of the program is to disseminate, to take from the person that they're studying and give to others to make them appear more, that more human and better individuals, to make them seem or appear better, you know. So, what you do encounter is, knowledge. Like, oh, I know that knowledge, and it's a divine knowledge. It's knowledge that's been given or handed down to a people to benefit them, to benefit humanity. But being that it's being controlled by something that seeks power, then it would be distributed and controlled through other means of finding people to usher that knowledge, and to give that knowledge, which would be a form of artificial intelligence, if that makes any sense. But another thing, isolation can result in a feeling of loneliness, boredom, and a lack of social support. This is what isolation can entail, but also alienation. You lack social support in alienation. So when you're alienated, that's one thing that is common, the lack of support, the lack of support, and yeah, and those that are in isolation, they really don't need any support because they find peace inside of their isolation. Alienation, you feel bothered by the fact that others are isolating you, and that may interfere with your peace, with your peace of mind. But in isolation, you'll feel more at peace with being isolated, being alone, But this is one thing that we wanted to share because we didn't touch on that, but now we can. Now we can see. See, it's Luke 20, chapter 20, verse 20. Keeping a close watch on him, they sent spies who pretended to be sincere. They hoped to catch Jesus in something he said so that they might hand him over to the power and authority of the governor. So they hoped to catch him in something he said, which, goes back to, thought crimes, thought crime or thought criminal, which would back then they were called heresy or being a heretic or things like that that went against what was socially accepted. What you have today they call Gnostics, and they have a different they are a religious sect, I believe, of Christianity that had certain beliefs that was contrary to the accepted norm. That's why you have certain Bibles, which they had to be authorized because they had to be the accepted. When it's authorized, that means that it's accepted. This is what's accepted. So, I wanted to share that, because, gang stalking is not something that, is new to mankind, to humanity. It's something that people have to get over. This is something that we have to, overcome. And we can't be shy about broaching that topic. And we can't be deceptive about speaking about our involvement in that. Like I said, there was a particular person that is in the church and said that he's gang stalked because of his belief in Jesus, then that means that every person that believes in Jesus has to be gang stalked as well. You can't be in a congregation in the largest religion in the world and be be singled out and targeted because you believe in Jesus. That's just not, that's contradictory, and that's contrary to you being in a congregation. You know, that's contradictory, and and you can't be set up to sell articles and the benefit from it. That's why I said that there's nothing wrong with you. The only thing that is wrong with you is wanting something to be wrong with you. When you want something to be wrong with you, that's when something is wrong with you. Other than that, nothing is wrong with you. Something is wrong with everything, everybody, and we can't look at ourselves as we are the only ones with a problem when everything is a problem. Everything has a problem with it, everything. But when you say that nothing is wrong with you, then nothing is wrong with you. We can't look for something to be wrong with us. That's why I'm not understanding why there's people that want to attribute these things to their name and then, say that they're that and don't really understand the solution to it. The solution to it is understanding that, gang stalking is biblical. It's biblical. It's something that the book is already published. The book is out. Everybody has the book. Everybody reads the story. So now that everybody has read the story, we are all familiar with what it means to be gang stalked. You don't know what gang stalk means? Go read Luke 20, chapter 20. That is gang stalking. You love Christ, put an end to gang stalking. But you will find out that you are amongst the people that's doing the gang stalking. But if you love Christ, guess what? You are in a position to put an end to gang stalking. Why? Because you are the biggest religion in the world. Not only that, you have enough money, resources, and power to bring this all to the forefront. And put an end to it. We're relying on the wrong people to put an end to gang stalking. The government. No, it's a society thing. The government, they are temporary, seat holders. But the people are and always will be that. The people are what makes up society. The government is just, the appointed people amongst the people, And like I said, they are servants of the people. So it's the people that are the actual responsible party. They're reprehensible for all and everything that has been in the recorded history of this world. People, So if you really wanted to put an end to the gang stalking program, you would tell the people to take a closer look at, what's been written in the history of humanity. So I just wanted to share that, because it needed to be shared. It needed to be shared because we don't take into account those that we isolate, that mean good, and those that we praise that really mean bad, that they mean harm for you, that they give you, harmful, or they perpetuate harm to humanity. They perpetuate it, and these are those that we praise. When you're dealing with celebrities, when you're dealing with um, people that what you call um, are abnormally the norm of society, when you have gang members and you have uh, uh, the new form, the YNs, and these people, the more attention you give them, the more power you give them. Attention is power because it attributes to a social acceptance. The more attention you give a people, the more power the people have. The more you reject a people or alienate a person, the less they feel power. The less power they have, they feel powerless. But then there's others that are powerful because they don't need or have a need for power, because they have all the power is within them. So, like I said, it's the people, that is a determining factor if the program will come to an end, or it will, be something that we prolong and we perpetuate. We perpetuate this thing. They've recently seen that Larry Hoover was excommunicated, and that was a big thing, by Trump. Where I even stated, that they should do that. That's one thing that Doge should do, was to seek to release people that were that was targeted, by a certain system that was set up in these communities, which to this day they are still casualties of those same systems. And like I said, we found out that it was a systematic thing that was unleashed on a particular community by a certain agency. And being that these things are, they're researchable, and they are sourced with a paper trail that leads back to that group, then now you have a people that are responsible for certain crimes against humanity, and not only just the humanity, but a certain group of people in humanity that may be slighted in a certain sense. And because these actions are made aware and brought to the front, and light has been shined on them, now you are in a position to seek retribution for those wrong activities. If these events didn't happen, those events wouldn't happen, and those events wouldn't happen, and those events wouldn't happen. So you are able to go back and say, we have to write this so we can correct that, and correct this, and correct that. But as opposed to them doing that, they're saying that, Trump didn't, Trump may have did that, but he didn't do that. That's not up to him. It's up to you. Little do you know that is the power resides in the hands of the people. So if the people wanted to change certain things, they would change it because they have the power and authority to do so. So that's just one thing that I wanted to share, because it actually needed to be shared. And I'm just gonna leave it on that note, because yeah. But yeah, if you want more detail about gang stalking, you could read, Matthew, read John, read Mark, read Luke. You'll see, what gang stalking is, the effects of gang stalking. You'll see it. Like I said, read Mark, Matthew, Luke, read John, read the Bible, read read the Bible. You know, you want details. You know what gang stalking is and alienation is, and but this is gang stalking 101, alienation. So, peace.